You're listening to Reverie, True Crime, your gateway to the darkest corners of human nature, where we expose the hidden truths of human depravity. These harrowing stories serve as a sobering reminder to keep our senses keen and our awareness sharp, for predators lurk in unexpected places, patiently waiting and observing. Join us as we unravel mysteries, explore motives, and seek justice for victims as we bring awareness to these cases. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige. Before we start this episode, I just want to say that this case involves some of the most brutal crimes ever prosecuted in Tennessee. The details are horrific and may be deeply traumatic. Please consider your mental health before continuing. If you or someone you know has been affected by sexual violence, you can call the RAINN National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-HOPE. That's 1-800-656-4673. Or you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Or you can text the Crisis Text Line. All you have to do is text HOME, HOME, to 741-741. If you're a survivor of sexual violence, please consider whether this content is appropriate for you at this time. In January 2007, two young people went on a date in Knoxville, Tennessee. Channon Christian, a 21-year-old University of Tennessee senior, and Christopher Newsom, a 23-year-old carpenter, planned to grab dinner and attend a friend's birthday party. They never arrived. Over the next 4 episodes, we will tell their complete story: who they were, what happened to them, and how their families fought for more than a decade to ensure justice was served. This is not an easy story to tell. It's not an easy story to hear, but it's an important one because Channon and Chris deserve to be remembered not just as victims, but as the vibrant, beloved people they were. On Saturday evening, January 6th, 2007, Channon Christian sent a message to her friend Kara Sowards, quote, "We'll be there soon." She was talking about a birthday party, just a casual Saturday night gathering of friends. Channon, 21, and her boyfriend, Christopher Newsom, 23, were going to grab dinner first, maybe watch a movie, then head over to the celebration. They never arrived. By Sunday afternoon, Christopher's body was discovered beside railroad tracks in North Knoxville, burned, shot, violated in ways that would make seasoned homicide detectives weep. On Tuesday, investigators found Shannon's body stuffed inside a trash can in the kitchen of a rental house on Chipman Street. She had been kept alive for nearly 2 days while being subjected to torture so extreme that the medical examiner would later testify it was, quote, much more than a simple sexual assault, end quote. What happened to Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom during those 36 hours represents one of the most savage crimes in Tennessee history. 5 people participated in their kidnapping, rape, torture, and murder. The trials that followed would span more than a decade, involve a drug-addicted judge whose misconduct forced retrials, and ultimately result in death sentences and life imprisonment. But before we talk about the monsters, we need to talk about the victims. Channon and Chris were not statistics. They were not just faces on the news. They were real people with families who loved them, dreams for the future, and lives full of promise. This is their story. Let's get started. Channon Gail Christian was born on April 29, 1985, in Nacogdoches, Texas. She came into the world with a smile that could light up a room. Everyone who knew her said so. It was the first thing people noticed about her. That smile, bright and genuine, full of life. Her family lived in Louisiana for her early years before moving to Tennessee in 1997 when Channon was 12 years old. They settled in Farragut, an upscale community in West Knoxville, where tree-lined streets and well-kept homes suggested safety, normalcy, the kind of place where terrible things were not supposed to happen. Channon's parents, Gary and Dina Christian, worked so hard to provide a good life for their daughter. Gary is a man of deep faith, a Christian in every sense of the word, who would later speak at churches about forgiveness and overcoming anger. Dina is a mother whose fierce love for her daughter would drive her through years of courtroom battles, never giving up, never forgetting, and never letting the world forget. At Farragut High School, Channon was popular. She had that kind of magnetic personality that drew people in. She wasn't just beautiful, though she was, strikingly so. She was kind. She cared about people. She was interested in understanding human behavior, in figuring out what made people tick. That's why she chose sociology as her major when she enrolled at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. By January 2007, Channon was a senior, just months away from graduating. She was scheduled to walk across that stage in December of 2007, diploma in hand, ready to start her career. She had worked so hard for it. She studied, she showed up, and she did the work. Her future was bright and wide open. Her father, Gary, would later describe her saying, quote, "She was bold, she was happy, she was beautiful. I don't know where she got her looks from, but it wasn't me. She loved life, that's for sure. She was a Christian, and she cared about people." End quote. Channon had hobbies, passions, things that brought her joy. She loved golf. There's something meditative about golf. The quiet concentration, the satisfaction of a well-hit ball, and the beauty of being outdoors. Every year now, the Channon Gail Christian Memorial Golf Tournament is held in her honor, raising money for scholarships for female Farragut High School graduates who want to attend the University of Tennessee. It's a way of keeping her memory alive, of turning tragedy into opportunity for other young women. Channon lived at home with her parents in Farragut while attending UT. She had her own car, a silver 2005 Toyota 4Runner that she kept meticulously clean. Everything had its place. The windows always had stickers on them, little decorations that showed her personality. She took pride in her vehicle. On the evening of January 6, 2007, Channon was getting ready for a night out. She was at her friend Kara Soward's apartment at Washington Ridge Apartments, which is a complex off Washington Pike in North Knoxville. The plan was simple. Chris would pick her up, they'd grab dinner, maybe watch a movie, and then later they would go to their friend Jamie Hampton's birthday party. It was supposed to be a normal Saturday night, the kind of night that college students have all the time. Nothing special, nothing dangerous. Channon could not have known that within hours she would be fighting for her life, that she would plead with her captors, asking them if she was going to die, that she would endure torture so brutal, so prolonged, that medical examiners would struggle to find words to describe it. She couldn't have known that January 6th, 2007 would be the last night she would ever be free. Hugh Christopher Newsom Jr., everyone called him Chris, was born on September 21st, 1983 in Knoxville, Tennessee. He was a local boy, born and raised, with deep roots in the community. Chris grew up in a more blue-collar area of North Knoxville, specifically the Halls community. His parents, Hugh and Mary Newsom, raised their son with strong values. Work hard, treat people right, and stand up for what's just. Chris embodied those values. He attended Halls High School, where he played baseball for the Red Devils. Chris loved baseball. It was more than just a sport to him. It was a passion. His father, Hugh, would later reminisce about all those hours spent on ball fields, watching his son play, coaching, encouraging, and being present. Those are the memories that sustain you when the unthinkable happens. Chris was good at baseball, good enough to be remembered, to stand out, and to have his teammates and coaches speak of him with respect years later. He graduated from Halls High School in 2002, and afterwards he attended Pellissippi State Community College. But Chris wasn't just about academics and sports. He had a trade, a skill, something he could do with his hands. He became a carpenter. His father, Hugh, would later tell reporters with pride that Chris was a talented carpenter whose crown molding work could be seen in homes throughout Knox County. It's a particular kind of pride that a father feels when his son masters a craft, when he can point to something tangible and say, "My son made that." Chris was 23 years old in January of 2007. He was building a life for himself, working, learning, and growing into the man that he was meant to become. He had his whole future ahead of him, a career, a family someday, and decades of life still to live. Friends described Chris as a good guy, reliable, kind, the kind of person you could count on. He had a warm smile and an easy laugh. He treated people well. He was the kind of man that parents hope their daughters will date. Respectful, hardworking, and genuine. And he was falling in love. Chris and Channon had been dating for about 2 months. It was still new, that exciting phase where everything feels fresh and full of possibility. They were different in many ways. Channon was from the more affluent Farragut area, studying at the university, while Chris came from working class halls and had gone straight into a trade. But those differences didn't matter. There was chemistry. There was something real. Chris had confided to his father, quote, "I love her." And Channon's friends said she felt the same way. On the afternoon of January 6, 2007, Chris spent the day playing golf with his friend Josh Anderson. It was a cold day, January in Tennessee, but Chris enjoyed it. After golf, he went home to his parents, showered, and got ready. His parents asked if he wanted something to eat. He declined, telling them that he was going to get food with Channon. Around 8 p.m., Chris drove his pickup truck to Washington Ridge Apartments. He needed to give Josh a ride to Jamie Hampton's birthday party first. He dropped Josh off, telling him that he'd see him later at the party. He just had to pick up Channon first and grab some dinner. Chris drove the short distance to Kara Soward's apartment where Channon was waiting. He parked his truck and went inside. Channon and Chris decided to take Shannon's 4Runner instead of Chris's truck. Maybe it was more comfortable. Maybe it was cleaner. Maybe Channon just liked driving her own vehicle. Whatever the reason, it was a decision that would seal their fate. At some point that evening, between 9 and 10 p.m., Channon and Chris left the apartment. According to later witness testimony, they were in the parking lot of Washington Ridge Apartments. Channon was behind the wheel. Chris was standing in the open door of the vehicle, leaning in, kissing Channon. It was a moment of intimacy, of young love, of two people who had no idea they were being watched. And then, in an instant, everything changed. Men with guns emerged from the darkness. Channon and Chris were ambushed at gunpoint, forced into the back seat of Shannon's own vehicle, their hands tied behind their backs and their lives suddenly and violently stolen from them. Chris would never see his parents again. He would never finish that crown molding project. He would never walk Channon down the aisle, never have children, and never grow old. Within hours, he would be dead, shot 3 times and set on fire beside railroad tracks. He would have turned 43 years old in September of 2025. Instead, he's buried at Woodhaven Memorial Gardens, forever 23, a life cut brutally short. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, we need to understand what happened during those 36 hours. We need to know what Channon and Chris endured. We need to see the evil they faced, because only then can we understand why justice mattered so much, why their families have spent nearly 2 decades fighting to make sure their killers never walk free, why 2 laws now bear their names, protecting victims and reforming the Tennessee judicial system. Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom were not just victims. They were people, beloved people, and their story deserves to be told in full. That Saturday, January 6th, 2007, started as an ordinary day in Knoxville, Tennessee. The temperature was cold. Winter in East Tennessee means gray skies and biting wind. But for Channon and Chris, it was going to be a good day. Dinner together, a friend's birthday party, simple pleasures. Channon arrived at her friend Kara Soward's apartment at Washington Ridge Apartments earlier in the day. The complex was located off Washington Pike in North Knoxville, not far from where Chris lived. It wasn't an upscale area, but it wasn't particularly dangerous either. Just an ordinary apartment complex where college students and young working people lived. While Channon waited for Chris, she surfed the internet, checked her phone, probably texted with friends. Kara left for Jamie Hampton's birthday party around 8 p.m., telling Channon she'd see her there later. Channon stayed behind, waiting for Chris to arrive. Chris picked up his friend Josh Anderson around 8 o'clock that night, giving him a ride to the party. He told Josh he'd see him later. He just had to get Channon first and grab some dinner. Around 9 o'clock, Chris arrived at the Washington Ridge Apartments. He went inside, said hello to Channon, and together they decided to take her 4Runner. They walked out to the parking lot together. Again, according to witness accounts pieced together later, at some point between 9 and 10 that night, Channon and Chris were in the parking lot. Channon was behind the wheel, and Chris was standing in the open driver's side door, leaning in and kissing her before they headed to dinner. They didn't notice the other vehicle that had pulled into the parking lot. They didn't see the men inside that car watching them. They had no reason to be afraid. And then, that's when it happened. Multiple men with guns came out and surrounded the 4Runner. There was no warning, no chance to run, no time to scream for help. Get out of the car, now! Guns pointed at their heads, hands grabbing them, shoving them. Channon and Chris, terrified, did comply. What else could they do? If you resist, you get shot. Everyone knows that. So you do what they say. You stay calm. You wait for an opportunity. You pray they just want the car, the money, and that they'll let you go. But these men didn't just want the car. Channon and Chris were forced into the back seat of the 4Runner. Their hands were tied behind their backs with shoelaces. Their eyes were covered. Chris had a sock stuffed in his mouth as a gag, secured with another shoelace wrapped around his head. One of the attackers got behind the wheel of Shannon's 4Runner. Another vehicle, a white Pontiac Sunbird, pulled up alongside. The carjackers were working together, coordinated. And then the vehicles drove away, disappearing into the night, carrying Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom toward a house on Chipman Street, where unimaginable horror awaited. At 10 p.m., Jamie Hampton's birthday party was in full swing, but Channon and Chris had not shown up. Their friends started texting and calling, but no answer. It went straight to voicemail. That was unusual. Channon and Chris were reliable. They said they would be there. Where were they? Around midnight, two friends, Josh Anderson and Justin Russell, got worried enough to leave the party and drive to Washington Ridge Apartments to look for them. They found Chris's pickup truck parked where he had left it, but no sign of Shannon's 4Runner, no sign of Channon or Chris. At 12:33 a.m. on Sunday morning, January 7th, Shannon's cell phone placed a call to her parents. Gary and Dina Christian answered, expecting to hear their daughter's voice asking if she could stay out a little later. Instead, Shannon's voice was strange, strained, and scared. "Mom, Dad, I'll be home between 2 and 3 a.m. That was it. The call ended. Later, prosecutors would argue that Channon was forced to make that call, to buy her captors time before anyone reported her missing, to make her parents think everything was fine, just a late night out. It was the last time Gary and Dina Christian would ever hear their daughter's voice. By 1:30 a.m., a witness named Xavier Jenkins saw something strange. He lived near the Chipman Street area, and he spotted Shannon's silver Toyota 4Runner parked in front of 2316 Chipman Street. Behind it was a white Pontiac Sunbird. 4 black males were visible, moving around the vehicles. Jenkins made a mental note, but didn't think much of it at the time. He had no way of knowing that he was witnessing the aftermath of a kidnapping. Inside that house, 2 young people were being bound, blindfolded, and terrorized. At 2316 Chipman Street, a small rental house in a rough neighborhood, Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom were dragged inside. The house was rented by a man named LaMarcus Davidson, a recently released ex-convict with a long criminal history. Davidson was not alone. His half-brother, Latalvis Cobbins, was visiting from Kentucky, along with Cobbins' girlfriend, Vanessa Coleman. A friend named George Thomas was also there, and a 5th man, Eric Boyd, would later be implicated as a key participant in the crimes. These 5 people, 4 men and 1 woman, would, over the next 36 hours, commit acts of such depravity that prosecutors, judges, and jurors would struggle to maintain their composure in the courtroom. But Channon and Chris didn't know any of that yet. They were bound, blindfolded, and terrified. They were being held in a stranger's house by people who clearly had no intention of letting them go. The nightmare was only beginning. Thank you for listening to part 1 of this series. I had tried to do this series before, and I couldn't finish it. I decided to start over and put them out like chapters. For the first episode, I wanted to talk about Channon and Chris as the real people they were, with full lives, families, and futures. I do want to warn that part 2 will contain the most graphic and disturbing content of this series, describing in detail what happened to them. Please take care of your mental health and only continue if you feel able to handle extremely traumatic content. Until next time, stay safe and take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode. As we close out, let us not forget awareness is our greatest defense. In a world that can be dark and grim, vigilance is our beacon of hope. When it comes to the cases we have explored together that have remained unsolved, if you happen to hold a piece of the puzzle, dare to step forward. As author Lois McMaster Bujold once said, "The dead cannot cry out for justice. It is a duty of the living to do so for them." Until we reconvene, my friends, stay vigilant and stay informed.